I mean, just a short introduction. What's your profession?
I'm a postman. I'm from Rochester. A postman.
Yes.
From Rochester in Kent.
I see.
I've come with my friend.
That's right. Now it's all right.
I've read the teachings of Islam by Your Promised Messiah. Even though it's a very good book of morals and standards, it doesn't prove that it wasn't written by anybody other than a wise man, bringing me to my conclusions and belief that there isn't a God, because morals and standards can be found within oneself and only requires man to seek them out.
I couldn't exactly follow what you said, please.
Shall I repeat it?
Yes. The conclusion, what you want exactly to know, that should be
I would like you to
please.
Try and explain to me why God creates. I believe that the standards and morals can be found within oneself and doesn't have to be related to a God. And from reading the book, it was just a very good book. But I have read history books which are very similar, but not on a religious basis, just saying the same things and coming up with similar conclusions, but not on a religious basis, just on conclusions of facts.
Yes.
Do you understand?
Yes, that's right. That I follow. So what do you want me to explain? I mean, that is correct, partly, not entirely, that morality has been discussed on non-religious basis as well, at different times in history, that we know. But to say that the same principles were involved and the morality was based on a strong foundation of principles and was ultimately connected to God, as if all morality sprang from Him, and how it was connected systematically, that was what was new in that book. That was what was not attempted as he attempted in the book The Philosophy of the Teaching of Islam. And he traced back every claim through the holy book, the Quran, to God, and referred to each verse which discussed that subject. Now the point which he was making was this, that if a book is revealed by God, words should not be put into the mouth of that book. Human mind may achieve certain truths, may reach certain truths, because wisdom in itself, if it is true wisdom, leads to God and leads to morality. So human efforts can reach certain truths, but honest and sincere and truthful people say, this is the efforts of our mind, we have reached them. But what he found was a very difficult and complicated situation. Many religions preached morality which they had either borrowed from other religions or they had reached those certain beautiful, attractive truths by themselves. And they claimed that this is our religion. Now this was the issue at hand when this conference was held. And the followers of each religion were expected not only to make a claim, but to prove it entirely from the so-called book in which they believed, so that no confusion is left. If that particular religion to which they adhere does clearly claim that this should be the moral course, then it should be traced back to the book. Otherwise, don't add things from your own and claim that this is a beautiful religion. Now this was the issue at hand when he was expected, along with many others, to opine on certain questions which were given to all the speakers belonging to various religions. And here he represented Islam and traced all his claims to the Holy Quran and through the Holy Quran to God. Now what is to be seen and judged is this, that all these truths as such, whether they have been explained by others, whether religious or irreligious people, and if they are, where? To my knowledge, as far as I know, no philosopher has discussed these aspects before him or even in his time. Even after his time, the philosophers were probing into certain things and could not find an answer, and they admitted that in so many words. I have quoted one example even before in this very session. There is one renowned writer and political and philosophical and moral thinker who was born in Russia by the turn of the century. And he was a young man when the revolution took place, but he was representing the press. Although he was also a physicist and some other qualities he had, and knowledge, branches of knowledge which he had access, but he chose to be a representative of the press and attended the conference in Belgium, the peace conference on Russian side. But later on, I'm talking of the First World War, immediately after the First World War. Later on, during the revolution, he was completely disillusioned, and he started writing on moral aspects and political aspects and their relationship and so on. And his letters were published in the Times London and also New York Times and so on. He was a man of that stature at that time. He writes a book on the model of the new universe, where he tackles many moral questions and try to reach out to truth. Yet many a time he raises exactly the same questions as have been raised in this book, and discusses what has already been said by various authorities on this, various religious approaches and so on and so forth, and reaches a certain point where he finds it a blind alley, can't go any further. And anyone who has read that book, and also this book which you have referred to, would immediately say that had he but read this book, it wouldn't have been a blind alley, he could have gone a bit further. Now this book, for instance, discusses also the prospects of life after death and the concept of hell and heaven. What should be hell and what should be heaven? Apart from the fact that various religions have produced a certain picture, whether the concept of hell does appeal to your conscience and your mind or not, and so the concept of heaven is acceptable to man or not. And he builds that, and not from his own, but from the Holy Quran, that this is the concept of hell and heaven in the Holy Quran. This is the concept of life after death in the Holy Quran, and those answers which he gives, as far as I am concerned, satisfy, and as far as I can imagine, satisfies and should satisfy every human intellect. If my claim is correct, then it is there that he has said something which none else has ever said before him, whether he was a religious person or an irreligious person or a non-religious person. Now this I am pointing out in connection with this Ouspensky's model of the New World, because he reaches that point where every religion fails to satisfy his inner agitation. He says, I must believe in life after death because it is within me, it is rising from within me. It's impossible for man to be created and such a complex machinery to be created just for it to live and die and finish with it, and for the criminals to go scot-free, and for the usurpers of other rights to be liberated after death, and so on and so forth. And those who suffered here without reward, they end up, and that is the end all of everything. Now raising these questions, he says, but the religions give a picture, paint a picture of life after death and of heaven and hell, which is equally unacceptable to me as this is acceptable. And in search of this truth, I have studied many books, many philosophers and religions. But unfortunately, nothing has satisfied my conscience and my mind, and he raises certain questions. This is the objection against this, and that is the objection against this. Now, if you read that and also read this book, immediately it would strike your mind that had he but read this book, he couldn't have said these questions remain unanswered. So that is what I mean. If a critical analysis of the book has to be made, it has to be made not in generalizations, but in particularizations. Find out what he has said and search for it to be found in other literature and the way it is discussed in other literature. Then we will know the true worth and value of this book. And this is the reason why at his time, when he was just an unknown entity, speaking from a very small village of Qadian, which was not recognized by his own people, his book created such wide impression and such deep impression upon the world that Tolstoy in his time noted this fact, that something has appeared in the world which must make its imprint. It's a very great work. And despite the fact that he was in the middle of such controversies with Christians and Hindus and Sikhs and other Muslims, when this conference was held, when he delivered this speech, if you read the history, you'll be surprised that with one acclaim, everyone present continued pressing him to continue, the representative who was reading his lecture, and the other speakers surrendered their time until the whole time allotted for that conference was over. And then hurriedly a meeting of the organizers was called. It was decided that it should be extended for one further day. We must continue to hear this lecture. And all the papers of the time declared it to be by far the best essay on this subject. Civil and Military Gazette, that was a very important paper and which had its voice heard all over India. It was a very important paper of the British time in Lahore, being published from Lahore. That paper and other Muslim papers and non-Muslim papers and Christian papers and Hindu papers, they had to admit. So there must be something in it. Even today, this is my considered opinion, which I suggest to you. You should, if you want to verify it, you should compare it in the way which I am suggesting. For instance, he says how the soul, what would be the shape of the body, how it will be built, what sort of body it would be. Now, if you study religions, you will be surprised to learn that they all claim that the body would be a sort of carnal body. Everything put together again, and a man as we find it here would be reborn. He rejects it, not from his own, but quoting the verses of relevant verses of the Holy Quran. Then again, the question rises, what would be the shape, how that, whatever the body is, what would be its nature and how it would be formed and what would affect its formation and shape. These are the most important questions. And he is the only one so far in the world, nobody has said this thing even today, up to date I mean, that the soul which is given to man is constantly influenced by the moral acts or immoral acts which he commits. And they give the shape to the soul, and the soul is in a continuous process of evolution, and a finer, more ethereal body would develop from within that soul. Like from this matter, this soul developed, and it would be a long process. And that body, which we call it body, would be in relative terms only. the soul which we have would serve as a body, and a new soul would evolve from within it. And the qualities of the soul would be the qualities of our morality. And he proves it from the Holy Quran, from various verses, that if somebody is blind to truth here, because it's a spiritual blindness, that soul, that which would be body of course, working as a body in relative terms, would be blinded. And that would be hell, that would be suffering. Then he describes the concept of hell and suffering in terms of relativity. While he has no concept of the theory or relativity as propounded by Einstein later on, I am not referring to him. He is producing or propounding a concept of relativity in religious terms, which is the most modern concept. Yet he refers it to a book which was claimed to have been revealed by Prophet Muhammad, and we believe it was revealed to him by God about 1300 years before the time of the promised Messiah. And he told us, mentioning those verses, drawing inferences from those verses, which are still there for any person who wants to criticize them, but perhaps he has attributed things to those verses which were not meant. But his logic is so strong, his interrelationship between the verses, that no other conclusion can be drawn by a sane man. And what he claims is this, that the hell and heaven are relative terms which can coexist in the same space, in the same conditions. So this is why the hell described by the Holy Quran occupies the same space as heaven. And he quotes it from proves it from the verse, Arzuhas, about the heaven. The Holy Quran says, Arzuhas samawatu wal ard. The heaven would occupy the entire space of the universe. And then he quotes the Holy Prophet of Islam, peace be upon him, that when this verse was read out to his companions, it was pointed out, how can it be possible that the heaven occupies the entire universe space, yet the hell is also there? Where is hell situated then? The answer of the Holy Prophet was, it is in the same space but you cannot realize. Now this is most revolutionary. He is not only explaining the Holy Quran, but he is proving that this explanation was known to the Prophet of Islam, to whom the book was being revealed. And he is neither adding words to the mouth of the Holy Quran nor to the mouth of the Holy Prophet of Islam. And from there he builds his inference and the theory based on these facts. And he quotes examples. He says, for instance, if somebody is extremely thirsty and also extremely hungry, deprived of energy, you present to him a bunch of chilled grapes, that would be heaven to him, because it would provide both the coolness which he requires, the water which has been drained out of his body, the energy in the most quickly assimilated form, and nothing could be better than this. But in the same place, in the same temperature, there is a person who is extremely nauseated, who is sick, and who is also physically in the same condition. He has been dehydrated as he is, the other person is, or perhaps more. He is also dying because of lack of energy. Yet you try to give him a bunch of chilled grapes, and if you insist, he may slap at your face and say, what the hell are you doing to me? I can't tolerate the very concept of anything sweet or anything edible at all. I don't want to eat anything, I don't want to drink anything. Now, the situation is the same, but the same thing is hell for someone and heaven for another person. And then he says that it would, how the soul would develop and how the same process would create hell and heaven for various people of various degrees. He goes on to propound that those people who love their Lord God here, who know Him, who do good acts, when they go to the other world, they come closer to their Lord, closer to those realities which they loved even before. So they will enjoy them much more than previously. But those who cannot hear the name of God or goodness, or who enjoy bad things, if they are totally deprived of those bad things, suddenly, that would be hell. For instance, even a person who is addict of hashish, it's a bad thing, of course. Yet you just immediately break him off from the hashish and you see what hell he suffers. So he explained all these things based on a religious truth, not from his own self, but it also speaks very highly of his intellectual and spiritual heights. How before him for 1300 years, various scholars had been reading all these verses generation after generation, and none before him could reach those wonderful explanations which are satisfying both to mind and heart. Now, if you compare this with any other man-made philosophy or any other religious concept of life after death and hell and heaven, then you will realize where he stands, how different he is. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, please.
Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu.
Hazur, a friend, Mr. Yahya Hassan Bajwa from Switzerland, has sent a question which I frame in my own language for Hazur to...
Yes, why not in his language?
Because it's a letter.
Okay.
It will be long.
Please.
He says that there are wars and immense expenses on their preparations. There is hunger in the world, and then there is a question of population. And in face of all that, there is the Muslims' attitude, which is passive. They are doing nothing to save the people from starvation, and they are contributing nothing to world peace. They are wasting their power through the disunity. And under these circumstances, he asks, what do you expect from the youth of the world, especially of Switzerland, and what role can Ahmadiyya movement play in order to bring back the glory of Islam? And
now, all this is one question?
Yes, this is one question. And that is the
Even in his own words, that was one question, or you have put all the questions together and mended them into one?
That is all, Hazur. This is the question, really.
And has he asked just one question in his letter, or was it?
These are the themes which I have put them in one question.
You see, that is the mistake. That is a mistake.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that you have committed. I feel that he put various questions independently because they are related questions, but independent questions. So you have mended them, molded them together into one ball of questions.
Otherwise, I wouldn't be permitted to
Why
ask
don't
all
you
these questions
separate the threads one after the other, and we'll take it up one after the other, please. Right? So, the first part of the question
is wars and the immense expenses.
Yes. What is the attitude of Islam and Ahmadiyya? That's a good question. Yes, yes. Islam is a religion, and Islam opines on the subject of wars from the religious point of view. And according to the Islamic concept, number one, killing of man by man is a heinous crime. Bloodletting of others, taking forced sacrifice from others is all prohibited, completely prohibited by Islam. So much so that Islam lays very special stress on the sanctity of life. As I feel, as I think, no other religion has laid so much stress on the sanctity of life as such. I'll explain how. Number one, Islam says that no one is the master of life, even his own. You can't take even your own life in your hands. It is a big crime. Islam says that if you kill one person, as if you have killed the whole humanity. It's a very rich verse in deep philosophy and meaning, but there is no time to explain what it truly means. But just the superstitious truth is quite enough in relation to this question. That if somebody has killed one man, he has violated the sanctity of life. It amounts to killing the whole mankind, because the very principle is hit. He has taken things into his own hands of which he had no right. Islam goes on to say that you have no right even on the lives of the lower animals, and those which are permitted to you for eating, they are permitted only on the condition that each time you slaughter such an animal, you take Allah's name to remind yourself that you were not the master, it was God who permitted you. Then Islam claims that there is no coercion in religion, and with one stroke does away with the concept of coercion and use of sword in religion. Of the religious wars, it says that the Muslims are only permitted to defend themselves after they have been wronged for a very long period without any rhyme or reason, without any cause of offense. They are only permitted after they have been turned out of their homes. And the only crime they committed was that they claimed there was no Lord but Allah. Allah was their Lord and their master and sustainer. This was their crime. And the sword has already been raised against them, and they are being slaughtered. Then Allah permits, under such conditions, now Allah permits you to defend yourself with the promise that He would help you and He would be at the back of you. This is the concept of holy wars in Islam, which of course has been distorted by other mullahs, but we do not agree, because this verse of the Holy Quran which I have quoted from Surah Hajj is very clear on this subject. There is no shadow of doubt left. Anyway, this is the sanctity of life, how such a religion looks on the wars of whatever nature they be and the causes. According to Islamic concept, the wars are a direct result of immorality. All the other factors come later into picture. Morality is the highly important factor which is responsible for wars. Man is a selfish animal. That is acceptable. No religion denies that. So a selfish animal has to be trained in morality to be sociable, to stick to certain rights and to see to the others' rights as well. That is morality, of course. Now, religious morality teaches absolute morality according to Islam, while other moralities which are man-made are always relative moralities. The morality of a British subject would not be defined exactly as the absolute morality, because at certain stages in history they would come to clash with each other. If for the loyalty to the British people, a Britisher is expected to violate the rights of other people, his concept of morality would be to stick to the British loyalty first. That stands uppermost. If a Russian has the same situation of clashes of communist interests with other genuine interests of man, according to Lenin, the definition of morality would be whatever serves the cause of your ideology is moral. Whatever goes against this is immoral. So when the definitions of morality begin to differ from country to country and nation to nation, a clash is an imminent factor. It can be delayed, but it cannot be wiped out, or it cannot be done away with. It's impossible. In such a situation, everybody would be marking time, and everybody would be waiting for his opportunity to pounce upon his enemy, because where moral interests clash, the enmity begins. It comes into being. The concept of one man goes overboard. So if these people are smaller in stature and dimensions and power, there will be small wars, feudal wars, war between smaller regions. They grow in power, and then you see Hannibal, and also you see Genghis Khan and Halaku Khan, and so on and so forth. And when they become more intense and they occupy the global magnitude, then they become East and West divided into ideologies, and the superpower of the West and the superpower of the East. Because according to the Holy Quran, their concept of justice is not absolute. They simply cannot avoid an ultimate clash which may develop into a holocaust for the whole world. And here Islam has a very clear teachings, very specific and very clear, without ambiguity. It says that in such a situation where there are differences between people and people, لا يجرمنكم شنآن قوم على ألا تعدلوا اعدلوا هو أقرب للتقوى. That in a situation where you have to dispense justice, even if you have to favor a people who are hostile to you, never leave the value of absolute justice. Show favor to such a people and dispense justice. Huwa aqrabu lit-taqwa. For your safety and survival, it is highly important. It is essential for your survival. Taqwa is a most beautiful word used in the Holy Quran in various contexts and concepts. Literally it means security and saving yourself. Also fear, particularly fear of God in a different sense. So here taqwa in this context is to be translated as for your security and survival. It's highly essential. If you leave this principle and you ignore this principle, then you will definitely meet destruction. Because it is not say you will definitely meet destruction, but taqwa means if you leave taqwa, that is you leave security. Then you become unsafe. And if you leave all other factors out and try to analyze the present world situation or the world situation existing in the time of the Second World War or prior to it, or the world situation at the time of the First World War or the prior to it, then this key would fit into all these locks. Exactly. And today it is also true. These big powers, they think that if they come to a SALT sort of agreement or reduce their weapons and things, they would avoid war forever. They would escape the possibility of war. It's not possible, because both these big powers have relative terms vis-a-vis the morality, and both would act selfishly, absolutely selfishly, when the time comes. That means that whenever there is an imbalance between the powers, whenever something triggers off, the war is imminent, because there is a lack of trust. Lack of morality causes lack of trust. If I know you are a truthful person, and you know that I am a truthful person, you can leave millions of rupees or millions of pounds worth with me and come to an oral agreement with me. Why do you have to go to so many safeguards, the banks, the business, everything? This need for the police and the armies. People don't see, it's so surprising how they are blind to these facts. Lack of morality. Lowering of the standard of morality demands all these measures, which become so burdensome for the people that the whole economy suffers and crumbles down under these conditions, and they don't see the fact that the simple reason is that the man is becoming more and more immoral. About, let me see, it was in 1956, I was here in England, and I have seen conditions change so much now. At that time, I had a very small account, of course, but as a student naturally, but my account was in Lloyd's Bank here in Wandsworth. Whenever I went there and presented a check, they didn't ask how much money I had or the number or thing. They first gave me the money and I walked out, and then perhaps they worked out things later on. So once I was so surprised, because normally I had to draw only 10-20 pounds. Once I do perhaps 100 pounds, and they gave me the 100 pounds as well. So instead of walking out of the bank, I went to the manager's room and introduced myself and I said, look here, I'm so surprised. Why didn't you take precautions against fraud and things? He said, yes, I understand your point, but I can explain why. He says the incidence of bank frauds and forgeries is so low nowadays in Britain that if to counter it, we make some machinery and run the expenses for maintaining that machinery, the cost of maintaining that machinery would be much higher than the possibility that the total sum which we lose every year by way of these frauds and forgeries. So the banking rates were affected, the costs they were charging their customers, they were also affected, and now things have gone up and up because the morality is going down and down. They are always inversely proportional. And this is so important that it affects every sphere of life, particularly the security of man. The Holy Quran has so beautifully summed it up in the word security. All right, go ahead and be immoral or stick to relative moralities, but then you will not be secure. This is what we tell you. So it is the education of mankind which would solve all these problems, and nothing else. That I assure you. Man has tried many things before and has utterly failed, and was duped into thinking that next time clever people would come and wriggle out of these immoral situations. But immorality must capture them ultimately and bring them down along with it. And this is what I am seeing in the air writ large on the horizon. Neither Switzerland, nor England, nor any European country, or America, or the big power of Russia will be saved from that Holocaust, which is decreed for them. Decreed from above, no, not in that sense. Decreed by their own acts of immorality, by their own system of immorality, by their own viewpoints on human relationship. And that decree is being reflected from the heaven. Whatever we do on earth is reflected. So Allah is never the aggressor, Allah is never the punisher in this sense. Allah is never cruel to man. He permits the man to either choose a right way for himself or the wrong way, and once he begins to create his own hell, then Allah would not stand in that way, in the way of the hell. So it is created. And they want some easy shortcut answer, but that truth would make some demonstrations in the world and ultimately save the mankind. It's not possible. It's just a dream. We are realistic people, we know, and this is what we are doing exactly. Whatever is in our power, we are trying to call people back to the fundamental truth of religion and morality based on religion. This is the necessity of God. Morality can be discussed outside religion, of course, but that morality would always be relative. In its creation, because the man who would be conceiving the morality would be a child of circumstances and situations, historical situations, political situations, geographical and other situations. And also another man in the different situation would be conceiving the concept of morality in a different country perhaps. And they cannot tally with each other, it's impossible. So that parallax would cause different views and ultimate clashes. Two different poles would be created. The moment they are short-circuited, you would see hellfire. So this is my answer. Be wise, rise to the occasion and try to understand what we are telling you. Religion is important for your survival. And that religion in particular, which speaks of absolute truths, this is for you to judge whether it is Islam or some other religion. Yes, please, the second question.
Second question, Huzur, is asking about the hunger in the world and question of population.
Yes. This question has also been directly addressed in the Holy Quran. The Holy Quran tells us categorically that God has created man and God is responsible for the survival of man and provision of provisions for his maintenance. Not only that, Allah goes on to describe to many steps further and tries to make us understand that it is the same God who has created animals much less capable of survival than you are. And if myriads of species of animals, and he is responsible for the survival of each of those species, and he has certain laws which are governing the situation in the ecology. So to claim that God has created the system in a manner that the food sources would be left behind and the wheel of human production would move faster, this is a very bad allegation against the planner. And this is this amounts to denial of God or concept of a very stupid God who created two parallel wheels who should have run parallel, but one is moving always faster and the other is left behind. At times there might be something wrong with one wheel, and that may cause problems, but there is nothing wrong with the machinery. That is the claim of God. So if that claim is correct and you find imbalance, then search for your own follies and mistakes. What have you done to put some hindrance in the way in the path of one wheel? Or maybe you did not lubricate it enough, or maybe you neglected certain other things, and this is the reason of this imbalance. This is the claim of the Holy Quran. So in principle it prohibits man to go into family planning for the sake of shortage of food. For all other reasons it's permitted. It does not prohibit man to do family planning for any other reason except the reason of food shortage. And that is the only reason being advanced today in the secular world and also in some religious regions, that if you do not see to it, then you will go, you will face famines and things. Again, it's a very important thing. Morality also comes here again. Wisdom and morality, as I have tried to explain earlier, once somewhere, I think here in London too, that in my opinion, and I am saying it after considering it very deeply and widely, ultimate morality and ultimate wisdom are one and the same thing. According to the Holy Quran, it's very clearly mentioned. Those who are absolutely moral, they are absolutely wise. And wherever there is lack of morality, human cleverness and cunningness is short of that level where it can be called wisdom. So there is a differentiation between the two. So here too, wisdom or absolute morality is required. And according to the absolute morality, if some people in a hostile region to you are suffering from drought or famine, you must forget all the differences there. And for the lowest level of the common parentage, for belonging to one species as such, you must join your forces and see to it that man does not suffer from hunger anywhere in the world. If man was educated enough to adopt this attitude towards hunger and humanity, in no one region could you find drought enough or famine enough which could not be offset by the united pooled powers of the rest of the world. And everywhere in all along history, you will notice this very interesting fact, that the forces which were responsible for creating famine in one region could positively be defeated and frustrated if the surrounding religions did not have some political differences which stood in the way of the famine-stricken area and that concept of morality and their will to help. Always it was the fault of man, and according to the Holy Quran, this is fundamental. The right of man to survive, to have food, to have minimum clothing. That is, by minimum clothing, the Holy Quran says, which is enough for saving you from the weather hazards. That, according to the Holy Quran, is the minimum must for every man. And the Holy Quran goes on to describe further that as far as the minimum requirements of men are concerned, no consideration other than the consideration of humanity should be kept in mind. If somebody is suffering somewhere or a people are suffering somewhere, whether they are hostile to you in your religion, to your state, to your ideology, forget everything and help them. On the other hand, the Holy Quran explains that if you do not follow this, and if there are strings attached to your help to man, then that would not be an act of goodness in the sight of Allah. It would be an act of evil, because you did it for certain other reasons, and those reasons would later on be responsible for lack of help, which are now responsible for help. So apparently a goodness is operative at a certain time, but because the motive is bad, that act of goodness is not reliable, it's not trustworthy. The same motive in different situation would create an act of evil instead of goodness. So this, because this is important, so the Holy Quran rejects that act of goodness too, because it leaves a door of danger open for mankind. So famine, according to the Holy Quran, can be tackled at one stage, at any one stage in history, if man really wanted to tackle it as such. And these are trials appearing from time to time for every people. If humanity is suffering somewhere and the other people surrounding them, or at some distance even, do not really feel the pinch of that hunger themselves and help their brothers out, they fail in that trial. Not only they, but also those who are suffering. Now this is a very interesting point which has to be made, otherwise part of your question would remain unanswered, though it is not on the surface. But there is a hidden question underneath. What is the crime of those people who are suffering from hunger? Why should man be tried at their cost? In such a situation, when humanity fails to look after them, it is proved that man as such has become immoral and it is responsible for these things. If you change the arena, the platform of that famine, from the sufferers to the ones who are better off at that time, exactly the same would be their behavior. So man as such is liable for punishment. If they were good people, they would not be tried. This is also mentioned in the Holy Quran, that if you stick to these moral principles, then at the time of trials it would not be you who would be tried. And when others would be tried, you would come up to the mark and there would be no problem at all. So these are very intricate questions, but Islam tackles them very beautifully and in detail, but unfortunately because of the shortage of time I can't discuss it at further length. The third question, please. I thought there were quite a few in that one, rolled up ball.
The passive attitude of Muslims to contribution to save people from starvation and peace in the world.
Yes, that is a very important question. Islam is a most beautiful religion and most, a religion which is so pitiable in the sense that it has been abandoned by its own followers. And the result is that the act of Muslims is being attributed to the concept of Islam. And Islam, as looked through the mirror of these Muslims, by that I mean the majority of the Muslims, who are seen either as an entity in Iran or Saudi Arabia or other Muslim countries, Sudan and elsewhere, their reaction to these situations is not, unfortunately, the reaction which Islam demands. And the outside world, which has a lower platform of morality, in practice they are exceeding them in good reaction to certain situations, in commendable reactions. So it's a very complex situation which we find the world in today. There are religions which have not taught their followers to act so selflessly in the cause of humanity, yet through a long process of trial and error or through some social systems, they have started practicing those morals. And at the time of crisis, they stood out much better. And then the Muslims stood out at that time, unfortunately. I'm studying that in historical perspective. The result was an accumulative effect which made people believe that this is the Islamic way of life. They're selfish people. They spend their money on pleasures and worldly things or hypocrisies and things. But when Sudan is dying, when Ethiopia is dying, when other countries of the world suffer, then they just don't look that way. While the Christian countries, non-Christian countries, atheist countries, they extend their hands to those regions for help. So they claim that the Christians claim that Christianity is a better religion. It has taught and educated people well, better than the Muslim have been ever taught by Islam. And Islam is a bad religion. But if that argument is correct, then atheism would be a very good religion too, because the atheists have reacted in the same manner, and perhaps earlier than many Christian countries. And maybe some other isms or some other religions in those situations will be declared better. So this is always the confusion which causes a sort of fog before the vision of man, and he cannot decide which way to go. In my opinion, the only way to settle these questions is first to make a very clear distinction between a religion and its followers. They are completely two things at antipodes with each other, worlds apart. But they are separate entities only after a certain passage of time, from the time of the first revival, first revelation of the truth. Now we are entering slightly complicated ground, so I am going to explain it further. Let me start from here now. Here you find different religions and different adherents to those religions. And if their conduct is everywhere the same, in every region, then there is definitely a likelihood that the religion is either at fault or should gain credit for their conduct, because there is homogeneity. In different people, in Ethiopian Muslims, in Egyptian Muslims, in Iranian Muslims, in Pakistani Muslims, and so on. In a certain situation, they act exactly like one. So there is a probability, and I don't call it a certainty still. There is a probability that the religion is responsible for that conduct. Why not certainty? Because man cannot be seen just at one stage in history. We'll have to go back. We'll have to find out at other stages in history, at other junctures in history. Was it the same conduct which we notice among Muslims of various countries? Is it an unbroken behavior? If you find it, it is a definite proof that the religion is responsible for their conduct because the religion has made them into this. Now, applying this standard to every religion and the followers of the religions today, you will be surprised to find that nothing remains certain about any religious truth, looking at religions from the conduct of their followers. That is the most deceptive mirror which distorts things in different shapes, and the faces are distorted out of their shape and proportion. Sometimes they may become more beautiful, sometimes so ugly you can't even look at them. So how to go about it? Now I return to the second point I made, that the only criterion you can put is, at the time of the initial revelation of the truth, it is only that time when morality or the concept is at one with the acts. Action and theory are always at one with each other at the time of the first revelation. It is at the sources that the religion must be studied, if you must study through the help of the followers. Otherwise, go to the books. I'm just reflecting on this question from the point of view of studying a religion through the conduct of its followers. But the true answer is, you must study the religion at the sources in every way. Study the religion from the book and from the earliest versions of the book if possible. Study the behavior and conduct of its people at the sources, then you will never be misled. So now you go back to Islam at the time of Hazrat Muhammad Mustafa Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. What was his conduct at the time of famine, at the time of hunger, at the time of need of man? That is Islam, of course. And the Islam which you see through Arabs' eyes, or Arabs' mirrors, or Egyptian mirrors, or African mirrors, or Iranian mirrors, it's all just hocus pocus. I don't believe in that. But in the conduct of Muhammad Mustafa Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, they all must agree with me that is true Islam. So I quote two examples on the similar situations. Number one, it's a war, a battlefield, and so important that this the matter of survival. 313 Muslims go into grip with the invading army of Meccans, which is 1,000 chosen men of Arabia, who were so renowned in the art of war that poems were being woven about them. I mean, there was great heroes and a collection of great warriors. And there were 313 Muslims to defend themselves, while they were not fully equipped either. Some had half a sword, some had only a wooden sword, some had a staff, and they were not all whole-bodied people either. There were some who were lame, they could not walk straight, and there were some who were children, and some who were old men. This was the odd against Islam, or the Muslims of the time. And Hazrat Muhammad Mustafa Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam occupied the sources of water. At that time, when the sun rose, and you know how hot it may become in Arabia, a Muslim observer party noticed some Meccans walking towards the sources of water, which were in the possession of the Muslims. And they immediately decided to attack them, to stop them from getting water. Hazrat Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alaihi wasallam came to know of this and immediately stopped them. He said none would be stopped from the right to reach water. This is Islam in trial. This is Islam at its best as well. And this is Islam, and no other Islam can be acceptable to me or to any sane person if it is a distorted shape, if it's a Islam born out of many centuries and Islam which has entered its darker ages. So that is how Islam should be studied. Now this is a question of water. There was a time when the Meccans faced real famine, and the route passed through Medina, and if the Muslims attacked them, they would be deprived of their approach or access to the sources of food in the north. And this is exactly what happened. Those parties of the Muslims who had been expelled from Mecca and who had created certain posts on the same path, they started attacking the Meccans so that they could not reach the sources of food. And you know, their faith in Hazrat Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alaihi wasallam and their faith in the true values of Islam, they sent a delegation to Hazrat sallallahu alaihi wasallam begging him to stop these Muslims from attacking their convoys, because otherwise they would die of hunger. And this is exactly what he did. So for twice their lives were at the mercy of the Muslims, and they could take their revenge as best as they could. Once through trial of water and the other time through trial of food. And this was the answer. This would be the answer today. As far as the question of other people suffering from hunger and your reactions by way of helping them is concerned, you see it in the lives of the companions, how they were taught. The attitude toward their fellow beings. It's so wonderful. There are things which perhaps will never be repeated again. For instance, once during a battlefield, there was some youth who got extremely wounded, and it was a very hot day, and they were dying of thirst as well, apart from the wounds. So some person who was distributing water reached out to such an injured person, and he was about to drink water when he saw some brother of his in the same predicament, and he refused to drink water. He said, no, first give it to him. And according to most reliable sources, there was a chain reaction. Each one who was approached with water sent to his brother next. By the time he reached the end of those people lying wounded, the person was dead. And all had died by that time. When he returned only to corpses. What taught them this sacrifice for the sake of others? It was Islam. It was Islam in practice. Islam as taught by Hazrat Muhammad Mustafa, the founder of Islam, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, peace be upon him. So I am only a champion of Islamic cause. I am not a champion of every nation's cause. So if you ask me these questions, I will defend Islam, and I will only speak for true Islamic values. And they are only to be observed at the time of Hazrat Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alaihi wasallam for certain. But they never died out immediately. They are spread out all over, and they died out, of course, ultimately, but not entirely. There are many branches which remained green, even in drought. There are many channels which were still flowing with the life-giving water, even at the time of great scarcity of water. So, Islam is to be studied in the perspective of this historical flow. Any other question making a part of this? Was it all? Alhamdulillah. Yes, please. Who? Mr. Idris? Where is Mr. Idris? Huh? Mr. Idris, yes please. After him, yes. Would you want to ask a question? Will it be difficult for you to walk up to the microphone? In that case, we can, the microphone can reach you perhaps, can't it? Why don't you take the microphone to him? Because, or will you take the trouble to walk up to here? No, I think take the microphone there, please.
Assalamu alaikum. I have two questions, but I'll ask only one this week.
Thank you. Yes, please.
It is reported that...
And I think that should be the last as well.
Okay.
Because we have another session, as a meeting, our committee to attend.
I see.
So I should like this to be the last. Next time, inshallah, the remaining questions will be asked. Yes, please.
It is reported there's a serious decline in the numbers of church-going individuals in the Western world. What is the implication of this trend in Islam?
What's the declining? I'm sorry?
What is the implication of this trend?
No, I couldn't exactly follow you. What was the trend?
It is reported there's a serious decline in the numbers of church-going individuals in the Western world.
Church-going, by that do you mean church as a Christian term or church as a place of worship?
As a Christian term.
That's right, yes.
What is the implication of this trend in Islam? If there's a similar trend in Islam, what is the plan of Ahmadiyya to stem this trend?
All right. This question can be answered from can be looked at and answered from different angles. Number one, as far as the sanctity of churches is concerned, Islam speaks very strongly about the sanctity of places of worship, including churches. And there it does not make any discrimination. In the verse which I quoted regarding the permission to defend yourself against an enemy who is persecuting you religiously, the permission is attached to this condition, and it is explained. The Holy Quran says that if you had not permitted people to defend themselves for a right cause, then even the churches would be demolished and the synagogues would be destroyed, and so would be the places of hermits and also the mosques. So here Islam brackets every place of worship with the mosque and mentions church as such. So that shows that anything which is built for the sake of worship to God must be respected, regardless of whichever religion has built that place of worship. Now, if those who believe in Christianity decrease going to churches in number, then it's a sad affair, according to this declaration of the Holy Quran. If churches are to be respected, they are respected only because there are people who go to churches for the sake of worship. If they have wrong concepts of God, or if they associate partners with God, even then, the true intentions behind their taking the trouble of going to that place of worship is just to bow to some deity which they think is responsible for their creation. So this is the most beautiful universal principle which has been given to us by the Holy Quran, that the places of worship must be respected, and their sanctity must be safeguarded, and their sanctity depends on the attitude of their own people. If they disregard them themselves, it will be a very sorry situation. So that is the disadvantage. That is the bad point of the trend you are just mentioning. But there is a silver lining to every cloud, as they say. For certain people, or for certain faiths and religions, this situation can turn to advantage as well. If there is a debate on which religion is true, more prejudicial the people are, less likelihood there is of their finding the truth. And this is the main reason why we see many religious wars fought in history, not only the physical wars, but I'm talking of verbal wars of ideologies or wars of pen. Yet you find very few conversions from one side to the other. Just negligible. What is responsible? Dogma, dogmatic attitude, this narrow-minded parochial approach. This is ours and that is yours. So when some people leave going to churches or to mosques, that dogma is weakening. That something within which was responsible for their interest in the churches, that is crumbling and giving way to something new, maybe to nothingness. But that is the right time for at least a relative truth. Of course, there is truth in every religion. But when I say relative truth, a truth which is more acceptable to the conscience of that man of that age than the truth propounded by the church. For that truth, there is a very big opening and chance. And because we claim that we are such a truth, I mean, we hold such a truth. So for Ahmadis, there is a message of both sorrow and glad tidings in this situation. Sorrow for the followers of Christianity that they are going downhill, and the places of worship which were so frequented once, they are being deserted. The fact in itself is sorrowful, but there is a hope in it. A hope that maybe these people, if they are disillusioned by the proclamations of churches and their dogmas and views, perhaps they would be in a better frame of mind to listen to Islamic truth. But they are also prey, there are dangers inherent. They immediately also become prey to anyone who attacks them. And more likely they would fall prey to the downhill forces rather than uphill forces. By downhill forces I mean those ideologies which attract them at a minimum cost of personal efforts and sacrifices. They would rather escape from Christianity to those ideologies which are pleasing, maybe superficially, but they are not demanding. You have to put very little. You don't have to buy them paying high prices. So these people are more likely to fall prey to such ideologies. So although apparently to look at, a man may begin to exult in the situation, a Muslim may, all right, now they have come closer to us. But now, no, not in that sense. You have to put in a hard labor to make them realize the truth so much that they have to buy it through their noses. And for that, a very great conviction is required. A a people with an easygoing life, a system of superficial pleasures and minimum responsibilities, that is exactly the atmosphere which has caused the diminishing of interest in church or breaking of the dogma. And that in itself is presenting a difficult front to the other forces. To bring them out of that situation is not easy, because then you will be calling them to higher responsibilities. Abandoning of pleasures at the cost of maybe a life of pain, consciously imposed upon themselves. So the battle would always remain a battle. Chances are opening up, but for those who are capable of making avail of those chances by putting in greater efforts. If the Muslims don't rise to this situation and the Ahmadis don't, then they will lose this opportunity and they may go to a worse state. Now at least they believe. Then they may fall prey to atheism, to those who are materialistic entirely. They say, to hell with the concept of God and religion, we don't believe in anything. We don't go to churches and we don't go anywhere where the name of God is being taken. So our approach should not be childish and light-mannered. It should be materialistic and analytical. This is why I am telling every Ahmadi to go into preaching and pay the maximum stress on this fact. Otherwise, he would also be held responsible if the society around him goes to destruction. God has given him a chance not to take up the right fruit just like that by extending his hand, but a chance where he can put in a lot of labor and convert it into an advantage for both sides. Is it all right? All the aspects are covered? Thank you. All right, now I should like this meeting to be brought to an end. As I have explained earlier, we have another session to attend. So who is going to call us on? You, all right.